Hi DMs, welcome back to Master of Dungeons. Continue our breakdown of Call of the Netherdeep, we take a look of Chapter 4, Jewel of Hope. So this is potentially the biggest chapter, and it's quite apt as it's one of the biggest cities in Exandria, which is great for you because there's little chance of randomly bumping into people. Imagine this being your London, as one of the largest populations in the world. It also means, unless your party are really determined, they'll not see the rivals until Chapter 5. If your party and the rivals are friends, then they might let your party know where they're staying, but if they're not, they won't. In my campaign, the rivals fled with Aloysia after stealing the Jewel of Three Prayers, started working with the consortium of the Vermilion Dream, and so didn't bump into the players at all. I also had Aloysia get promoted, so her stat block changed from the Cult Initiate to Extolent stat block. Also put her up in a manor house with a few other consortium people, so when my players used Locate Object to find the Jewel of Three Prayers, they found her, which turned into a fun encounter and gave me my first opportunity to give my players some decent money. Also, of course, if you do decide to have Aloysia steal the Jewel of Three Prayers, it doesn't actually give you anything to go any further within the book, so you'll have to come up with your own way to recover that jewel for all your players, which is what I had to do. Another issue with modules is it's designed to give you everything you need, so you don't really get access to large amounts of magic items and money, the two things most players want. A module is designed for players who's a group of heroes wanting to save the world. It doesn't leave large amounts of room for morally grey characters or mercenaries. So the first thing the chapter gives you is a few locations for your players to choose as a place to stay, starting from the streets to a nice resort. Next, it introduces the three major factions in the city. The first is the Allegiance of Allsight, the group who Prolix works for. They're the main faction interested in Elixir from a scholarly perspective. They're also the ones who oppose the consortium most. The consortium of the Vermilion Dream is the next new major faction. They're mystics and greedy magic hunters after power. Another faction your players can join, although technically not the evil. The bosses are almost entirely, and their missions are about stealing and getting power. The final faction that gives missions to progress the story is the Cobalt Soul. Critical Role fans will know they are the librarians and worshippers of Ioun, the Knowing Mistress, who Bo worked for. They're also the only faction whose final mission is altruistic, who want the Netherdeep destroyed, unlike the Consortium and Allegiance, who want Ruidium. Next, it gives you four minor factions you can potentially use for side missions. A couple also might appear in some of the other faction missions. Then it gives you descriptions on each section of the city, ideal for adding in extra side missions and personal quests for your players. What I did was, on my Discord, I used it as a bit of an info dump as well to give the players personal information on what the city sort of looked like. Also, what normally Prolix or Question, or I think Aloysia might give you a map of the city to give to the players, but it's certainly a way for them to sort of like look about the city. And lastly, it gives you side missions for each faction. Now, the way I did this was I kept the consortium as my bad guys. Aloysia had already upset my players by stealing the jewel, and my rivals were working for them. It puts the power in your hands on who comes to the players for recruitment. What I did was I had the Cobalt Soul and Allegiance both offer the first jobs to my players. This is mostly because there is a success or failure chance, which means if your players fail one, they have a backup faction to potentially work for. What my players did was succeed in both missions, so they had a choice, Allegiant or Cobalt Soul. The way I handled this was I was open and honest with my players. I told them that you only need one faction to progress the story, so it's entirely up to you who you choose to work with and who you don't. But you don't need both, and I won't be giving missions from both factions before going forwards, so my party chose the Allegiance. And that's all the chapter has. If you stick with pure story, it's relatively short and can be done in a handful of sessions. What my players wanted to do was side quests, earn money and buy magic items. So what I did was, for a month of sessions, I came up with a few side quests they could do to earn money. I also added in some personal stuff for my players. In an earlier video on this book, I mentioned my party barbarian was on a mission to track down her mother, so I had her turn up in the arena and added in some interesting parts of her backstory. It was also at this point one of my players hated their PC so much they decided to retire them and added in an Asmodeus worshipping paladin into the group, so they did a lot of behind the scenes stuff to further their own personal goals. Also, if you know of Sean Gilmore, you'd know his first franchise is in Anchorel, so you could add him in for your players to buy magic items. What I did was flip it and added in a boring monotone sales assistant, making Gilmore's less exciting than was expected. This is also where I made my move for my finale. If you've been wise, you'll have read the whole book and discovered the worst possible ending. In that, if your player is just free Elixion rather than try and redeem him or kill him, he will just go out and for a year wreck the world. What I did was several things. I had a rogue who decided to reaffirm his devotion to Avandra, and so had him receive a vision being told he could redeem him. With the now evil paladin, I had him have his own vision to kill Elixion, so he wouldn't just get freed immediately. Whatever you do is up to you, but obviously you don't really want your players to have the worst possible ending. But steering them in the right direction, Anchorel is an ideal location to start this. As those of religious persuasion, this is the first place they've been where they could go to a temple. Something else I do in my games is allow communion through priests. The spell Commune is, of course, a 5th level spell, and players don't have access to it until level 9. So what do you do before that? They must have questions of their god or any god before level 9. My answer is if they go to a temple, I allow them to commune. For a start, this must cost more than just some incense. A monetary donation is required. The cheaper your players are, the less accurate the god is, or perhaps the less willing the priest. I also make my answers fairly vague, as gods tend to be, but I also use it to steer ideas and thoughts. And if you have a worshipper of one of the 3 gods Elixion was allied to, then you can have that god also hammer home how he is a good guy in need of redemption. Anyway, this has been my look at Chapter 4 of Call the Netherdeep. Hope it helps. Hit me up with a like and a subscribe. Stay tuned for my next one, which is in Kalmoro. We're going back underwater and starting to get the toys we need for the final sections. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Until next time, happy hunting.